Well, a huge oil company called Energy Transfer is suing Greenpeace, the environmental group. Why? Because Greenpeace spoke out against their pipeline, the Dakota Access Pipeline, which runs through indigenous land and could leak oil into the water supply. So back in 2016, 2017, there were massive protests led by Native American communities trying to stop the pipeline, and Greenpeace supported them. You probably heard about these protests in the news. The most controversial part of the pipeline was its route near the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota. The pipeline crosses treaty land and threatens tribal water sources. Thousands came out to protest, including Tulsi Gabbard. Now, the oil company is suing Greenpeace for defamation, saying Greenpeace hurt their business by spreading lies about them. But a lot of experts say this lawsuit is just a SLAPP suit, which stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. The goal is not to win. The goal is to drown the other side in expensive legal fees and hopefully bankrupt them. So why is this case a big deal? Because if Energy Transfer wins, this could set a scary precedent. Big companies could sue anyone who criticizes them, journalists, activists, even regular people posting online. Protesting and speaking out could become risky because you might get hit with a giant lawsuit. The First Amendment is at stake. This isn't just about Greenpeace. It's about whether corporations can use the courts to crush free speech. So what's happening now is a group of top lawyers and human rights experts, including our guest today, Paul Pazimino, are monitoring the trial to make sure it's fair. But already there's major red flags. The judge is keeping things secret. The jury is being indoctrinated. The oil company's lawyers making wild accusations like calling Greenpeace terrorists. So this isn't just about one lawsuit. It's about who gets to speak out against powerful industries and whether the legal system protects corporations or the public. So now let's bring in our guest, Paul Pazimino, who's in the front lines of this case to break it all down for us. Paul is the deputy director of Amazon Watch, an organization that fights to protect the Amazon rainforest and indigenous communities. He spent decades working on human rights and environmental justice, standing up to some of the biggest corporations in the world. Paul, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, and thanks for that excellent breakdown. I mean, you you hit all the great points there. That was perfect.
Well, I really want everybody to understand this because there's a lot of people out there that are not that thrilled about environmental activists. They'll kind of think, oh, these people, they just get in the way, they block roads or they cause havoc. But and there's a lot of viewers that are very in favor of environmental activists. I myself was an environmental activist at one point and even ended up on a terrorist watch list for being one back when I was in the sixth grade. I mean, I tried to pass a law. I mean, I wrote a bill to prevent deforestation. And this was in, of course, 1991. And back then, environmental movement was labeled as terrorists, and they stuck a bunch of us on terrorist watch lists. And I didn't know that, of course, until 9/11, and then I couldn't get through an airport.
Wow.
And, that's like when I finally found out. But for people just hearing about this lawsuit for the first time, Paul, can you break it down for us? Like, what exactly is Energy Transfer accusing Greenpeace of? And why are so many legal
Yeah,
experts calling this a SLAPP suit?
yeah. There are a lot of pieces to it. It's super important that people understand this lawsuit was already brought up and thrown out of federal court, right? We are talking about it now because Energy Transfer venue shopped and then brought it to North Dakota where there's no anti-SLAPP legislation. So the claims brought against Greenpeace are flat out absurd, which is why this is so obviously a SLAPP suit and has been acknowledged as such by the experts that you mentioned and why the trial monitoring committee exists, right? So ultimately, Energy Transfer Partners is suing Greenpeace for $300 million for defamation, tortious interference, and saying that when Greenpeace joined the hundreds of other organizations and thousands of individuals who called out the Dakota Access Pipeline and the illegal encroachment on native lands, on Standing Rock Sioux tribe territory, they were then committing defamation. Just Greenpeace are being sued for something that hundreds of others said and has been repeated by many in
Yeah.
since that time, right? So that's one thing that's pretty much
So
insane on its
what are they
face.
claiming the defamation? Just to be clear, what are they claiming that Greenpeace lied about? Like, what was the defamation specifically?
That the pipeline could cause environmental harm and would cause environmental harm, that excessive force was used against the protesters who protested at Dakota Access Pipeline, some of the people you mentioned who already were there, and that the statements made about the land encroachment were false. Even though these things are all things that Greenpeace today still stands by. Nothing that they said is false. But
Right.
as I
I
pointed
mean,
out, that's why it was thrown out of federal court.
of course, it's not false. I mean, pipelines can cause environmental damage. I mean, they can burst, they
And
can
it
be
already
blown up,
has.
they can right, exactly. At one point, it did. It did leak, right? Didn't it have a leak on this
Yeah.
particular pipeline?
Yes. Yes, it did. Absolutely. And, you know, it's energy transfer, we could get into the details of this, has already been brought up and found guilty on criminal charges in many other states for environmental destruction. This is not a clean company by any stretch. And they've made
Hmm.
it clear that this lawsuit is to send a message. Their CEO, Kelsey Warren, who's a billionaire, who has already said, this is about sending a message. I don't even care if we win. It's not so much about getting the money. We want to silence these people. We want to prevent them from doing this. He actually said at one point that environmental activists should be removed from the gene pool. And
Uh,
so they've made it clear this is simply try to crush Greenpeace, because Greenpeace is one of the biggest names. Greenpeace is a bulwark of the environmental movement. If you can
yeah.
take them down, then of course the smaller groups like ours, Amazon Watch, for example, are much easier pickings. And we've been in the crosshairs from this type of corporate slap attack. Chevron tried the same thing. They used the same lawyers, Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher, who are suing Greenpeace in this case, will be in the courtroom in North Dakota next week, the same law firm, the same tactics: silence and intimidate your opponents, prevent them from speaking truth about what's happening. And
Is
it,
that the
it
same? Is that the same? The lawyers that went after Steven Donziger?
Exactly. The same law
Mm,
firm. Different
same firm.
lawyers in
Okay.
this room, because I think that was their New York office, and this will be their, I believe, their Texas office that is spearheading this case. But it's the same firm, and they tout themselves as, the pro-oil corporate watchdog, corporate attack dogs who take down opponents. They're even proud of the fact that they've done it not based on the merits of the case, but trying to undermine your opponents, which is what they did to Stephen in the Ecuador case and what's happening here. Like any other slap suit, this is not about the actual claims being brought, because they're frivolous. They're not true. And of course, the problem is we only have 10 states, I believe, in the United States that have anti-SLAPP laws that would have thrown this case out like it was thrown out of federal court. Now, there was legislation introduced during the last Congress to bipartisan legislation to introduce federal anti-SLAPP laws that would have
Yeah.
kept this from going to North Dakota. But of course, it hasn't passed yet. I'm actually confident that it will in the new Congress, because it's both right and left don't want to find themselves targets of rich, powerful people and corporations who can lawyer up and silence them just by threatening to sue them.
Yeah. Just so that the audience understands, an anti-SLAPP lawsuit is, so the SLAPP lawsuit is, that's like the label we throw on these types of lawsuits, that they're basically bullying lawsuits. They're just trying to drain you. It's obvious that they're just trying to drain you. They're just trying to scare you. And then that would also, then other people wouldn't want to protest, for example, because then they would say, or like in Steven Donziger case, they wouldn't want to go after big companies because the ramifications of what could happen to you personally are pretty severe. I mean, you could lose everything. They bankrupt you. They take everything from you. So an anti-SLAPP lawsuit is an official type of lawsuit where you can file and tell the judge, like, this is obviously a SLAPP suit. It's just a bullying case. And then the judge automatically would throw it out. And that happens really early on in the case, right? But you're telling
Exactly.
me that there's
Before you've had to
only,
spend millions
right,
defending
before it can,
yourself.
okay, so before you could get drained financially. You're telling me that only
Exactly.
10 states have anti-SLAPP
Only 10
laws?
states. Yeah. And California actually has a slap back law, which would make it even harder, because you if you were bringing a slap suit, you'd be at risk for damages just by bringing the suit. Because in a slap case, of course, if you win that case, you could theoretically sue for legal fees, right? But if it's thrown out of court before it even gets to trial, which would be ideal because it's clearly a frivolous SLAPP lawsuit, then you wouldn't. But in California, the law would actually afford the victim who's been attacked by a SLAPP a right to go after the company for fees, for costs, just for bringing the charge, which is really what it should be. Because the only
Yeah,
way to deter corporations from bringing these suits is if they actually suffer financial hardship. Now, the other
right.
aspect to bringing these suits is doing what we're doing, monitoring the trial and telling the public about what's going on here. Because what we want people to understand about what ETP is doing to Greenpeace is it's a threat to Greenpeace, it's a threat for sure to the environmental movement, but it's also a threat to free speech. And that's
Yeah,
why everyone needs to pay attention to what's happening. And if they close those doors and don't prevent the public to see what's going on, then it helps Energy Transfer, which is why we have this trial monitoring group to make sure that the trial is fair, that it's open to the public, and that like we have protection under our Constitution, we have free speech rights to talk about what's happening in this
yeah.
case. And ETP wants to make sure that doesn't happen.
Do you know at this point how much Greenpeace has had to spend on legal fees?
Millions. It's been a massive suck for them. Now the challenge here is there's not just the money involved. There's of course the campaign, the broader environmental movement, and Greenpeace is very focused on the fact that, especially in the last few months, there's been a massive rise in attention and solidarity and support from across the movement, not just environmental, human rights, free speech, everybody.
Yeah,
Organizations and individuals are paying attention, and that is where they need to win this case, because obviously, ideally, they win in the courtroom. That's going to be up to 9 jurors. And they're pulling from a jury in North Dakota, which has already been affected by information that Energy Transfer has been flooding into the area. They actually created a fake news website. I believe it's called Take Back the Truth, spreading more information
ugh,
about Greenpeace, which is affecting the jury pool there, right?
yeah,
So we'll see on Monday and Tuesday when they start selecting the jury if they're able to actually get a fair group of jurors in North Dakota, considering this climate, no pun intended.
yeah.
That's going to be a big test. It shouldn't even be there. It should be held in another location where they could actually have a shot at a fair jury. But that's part of the reason we need this trial monitoring group, because we're already seeing the judge won't allow a live stream, as I think you've mentioned. He's even blocked off. There's still no clarity on whether or not press will be able to get a live stream. The courtroom is very small. I think it has a maximum occupancy of 60 people. This lawsuit affects literally every American, right? So
Mhm.
think about having that important a case kept quiet. People can't tune in. People can't go. It's in North Dakota in the middle of winter, so not many people want to go. I'm not too excited about going into
Mhm,
that
right.
cold myself, but we have to be there. We have to tell people what's going on, and the judge needs to understand that everyone is paying attention to what happens in this case.
When is the hearing? When does it begin? The
So
trial?
the trial starts on Monday, the 24th. There's
Wow.
already been some pre-trial hearings happening, but the actual jury selection will begin on Monday and Tuesday, and opening arguments are slated to begin Wednesday morning.
So
And it's going to
interesting you
go on
talk
for
about
5 weeks.
this 5 weeks, okay. It's so these I keep saying this on my show over and over and over again, that we have to watch out because the there's groups out there that are hired. They're paid millions and millions of dollars just to figure out how to manipulate public opinion. I mean, they figure out, okay,
Okay.
what's the trend right now? What are people really into? And it's so interesting that this company, whoever their advisors are, whoever they've paid to figure this out, has figured out that if you create a website called Take Back the Truth, that this is what people are into right now. People are sick of being lied to. People are really skeptical of the news, of the mainstream media. People are skeptical of all these things. And so you can like capitalize on that and use that and harness that to your advantage, even though you're the big liar. Like, you're the big liar. But if you tell them, no, the truth is you're not being told the truth. Here's the truth. Then people are suddenly going to perk up and say, oh, somebody else is lying to me. It's not you. And it's so clever. I mean, but people have to watch out for that narratives are able to always be manipulated because there's smart companies out there that are paid millions upon millions of dollars to figure it out. How do I get you, who's skeptical of big oil companies, to suddenly champion the oil company? How do I get you from point A to point Z? And here's all of the psychological games I can play with you to lead you from where you are right now to where I want you to be. And they're so clever with that. So I think that's something people need to really pay a lot more attention to. And it's interesting that this company has figured that out. I mean, it's clever. It's clever of them, but that is a way for them to then poison the jury selection process. Because if the jury's like, oh, I already know about this, Greenpeace, and they're annoying, those and right now, environmental activists are like the bottom of the totem pole for being, like nobody likes the environmental activists. I understand.
Mhm.
But I think people need to pay attention to, so think of the activists you do like maybe you like the people who are against big pharma, maybe you like the people who are against the military industrial complex or whatever it is, right? And any sort of activism against any of these big groups, this is the type of stuff, like they'll look at Energy Transfer and they
Yeah.
say, all right, this is how you do it, this is how you do it. So if we
But
want to shut
all
up,
those people
you
that
know
you're talking about also, I believe the first thing on their list when they think of themselves as Americans and free is the right to say what they want to say about anything happening to them, right?
right,
Imagine somebody goes online and says, I went to this restaurant, it sucked. I'm writing a Yelp review saying, please don't go there, and they get slapped. That is
yeah,
happening, people in the United States. So, yes, you pick your issue, but your ability to talk about that thing, to tell other people about that thing, is a sacred right that we have, which is seriously at risk when it all comes down to the wealth of your opponent. Who, if you have enough money and enough lawyers, you can silence that person. And the
yeah,
problem here is not just, of course, that I think the reason what you're saying about environmental activists being seen in a certain way is because of that work. It's because
hmm,
there's been a concerted effort to defame and vilify and criminalize people who are fighting to protect their water, to protect their home, to protect their community. We've seen environmental disasters. Look at what happened in Ohio with the train that exploded. People who need to stand up and say, I want to make sure that my children are going to be healthy. There's toxins in this item that I brought home. The company should stop selling it.
yeah,
And by doing that, they're at risk. So
right,
whatever the issue is, it touches you. And if we allow, the courts are kind of the last line of protection in some of these ways, right? And so if we allow this to happen in the Energy Transfer case, they'll continue to criminalize and vilify the people who are standing up for their rights. Now, in the case of the fossil fuel industry in particular, this is a definite concerted effort, but it's an overall corporate strategy. We're seeing the growth of this. The fossil fuel industry knows that protests are causing it damage. They've made the calculation, it's been admitted. Like, part of the reason that we're suffering are these continued activists who are going out and telling people the reality of what we do and how it affects them. And
yeah,
so they work with firms like Gibson Dunn, and they hire PR firms to come up with the kind of messaging that you're talking about. And then they flood social media with this information, and then they build these kinds of lawsuits. So again, I've seen it personally with Chevron. Chevron tried that in the Ecuador case. I think you know about it, right? Because you interviewed Stephen. But
oh yeah, yeah,
imagine Chevron admitted to deliberately dumping billions of gallons of toxic waste into the Ecuadorian Amazon. They don't ever refute that they did that intentionally. And yet they were able to turn around and sue the very people that they poisoned and their lawyers in US courts, claiming this RICO conspiracy, and win
yeah.
based on their own lies with these same lawyers. So this is an extension of the same tactic.
Yeah. And
And
it's
it's
interesting that
showing.
they're going after them for defamation, because even if, now I think it's obviously true that a pipeline could, of course, burst, crack, leak. There's a lot of things that could happen with a pipeline. That seems to be pretty obvious. But even if it wasn't an obvious or known, has happened in the past, like even if somebody's just, activists are out there and they're saying, I think that these, 5G causes all kinds of cancers or something, and there's no, they, even if they haven't created a link, you should still be able to go out there and say it, because what if it is true, right? I mean, what if in the future we find out, yeah, that's true? And even if it isn't, you should still be allowed to voice your concerns about anything that's happening
Yeah.
around you. And the issue is that with them going after them for defamation and saying, well, you claim that our pipeline would cause problems, and that's not true. I mean, that's we've got to be able to say that. And they're going to make it to where we're not able to just say any of our concerns or fears, especially the ones that we can't prove are absolutely true. We should still be able to say anything and voice it. And this is a huge problem for the people.
And the two other issues with that case, right? The tortious interference part and the collective liability part are also chilling. Tortious interference is ETP alleging that when Greenpeace signed on to a letter with hundreds of other organizations focusing on banks and investors saying, you should not be supporting the Dakota Access Pipeline. These are the financial liabilities, the climate risk liabilities, all the reasons why. Those banks made their decision to fund or not fund. And ETP is alleging that by signing that letter, Greenpeace should be held liable for any financial loss that ETP suffered because banks didn't invest in their pipeline. And
Wow.
again, if you go out and say the same thing, if you say on your show, I think that sending military helicopters to this country is a bad move,
Right.
then you got Sikorsky suing you for tortious interference because they lost the sale of a helicopter, right? You should
Yeah.
be able to say that. And also imagine if you were one of 500 people that said that, but they thought, well, she's got some money. We can silence her. We'll sue her. And then that, in effect, will chill the other people. And then the other scary thing here is the collective liability issue, right? So people can look up and you can watch the video. You can see what the security folks did to protesters at Dakota Access Pipeline. They used anti-terrorism tactics. They shot people with frozen water. They attacked them.
Yeah.
And there was property damage by some of the people who protested. That allegedly those protesters, or some of them, right? But the protest, as you noted, was massive. It became a worldwide movement. And what they're saying is that Greenpeace, which wasn't one of the groups that initiated nor constructed, they provided training for anti-violent protest and direct action, right? They provided information on how to protest peacefully. But because some property damage happened, Energy Transfer Partners is saying Greenpeace should be liable for all property damage. That means if you go to a protest and somebody commits an act of vandalism, you can be sued for that as well, even if you had nothing to do with them and the protest in itself was meant to be and was on the whole peaceful. And
Yeah.
that really says, okay, we've got what that shows you is the attack specifically on the right to protest in the United States. If you flip that over, you could actually say, well, look at January 6th. Everyone who participated in that should also be sued financially for everything that happened, whether they were peaceful or part of the violent mob. And Trump could be held responsible for all the violence as well, which,
Right.
obviously a lot of people's opinions he should be. But if you look at it from both right and left, it's threatening your right to voice your dissent, no matter what's
Right.
happening in the country. And that's why this case should really matter to everybody, no matter where you lie on the political spectrum.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. That's why I'm a big defender of all protests, no matter what side they're on and whatever they're protesting. I was taught that as a young kid living in Idaho. I mean, I grew up in Idaho, and the first protests or the first kinds of shocking. I remember being in elementary school and learning about the neo-Nazi parades in the North, and and being like, what? They're allowed to have Nazi parades in Northern Idaho? And our teachers and everybody
Yeah.
around us would say, yeah, it's shameful. But we believe in free speech, so they're allowed to do it. I mean, but you have the freedom to not attend, so don't
Yeah.
show up. And we kind of make fun of them, like 6 people would show up to their stupid little parade, but it was allowed to happen. And that was the first impression I got as a young kid, that even if it's something abhorrent and you really don't agree with it and the people around you don't agree with it, you have to allow it because that's free speech. That's just what this country is. So that's our foundation. We can't let go of that. Um,
Exactly. And I think the
Do you,
money that this people still believe that the system is set up to protect everyone fairly, right? So you have two equal sides in a suit and you can defend yourself. If somebody brings a claim, you can stand up in front of a judge and make your case. They watch courtroom dramas or they watch, People's Court, but that's not what happens here. An army of 600 lawyers take over the courtroom, and here you are with one and two lawyers who you can afford to hire, and they hit you with subpoenas for thousands of documents, and they try to depose hundreds of people, and they force you to spend millions of dollars just to be able to say these are outrageous, frivolous claims, and there's no basis to them. And by then, you're silent. That's what
yeah.
Chevron tried to do in the Amazon Watch case. They tried to prevent us from campaigning on the Ecuador case by hitting us with subpoenas, and we got them all thrown out of court. But we had to fight. We had to fight and spend money and time and resources. And the time we were doing that, we weren't doing our campaign work, and we weren't
And the
focusing on what
Chevron
we needed.
case was extra dystopian, the fact that they went after the lawyer. So it's like one thing to go after the activists, that's already
Yeah,
chilling and that's already silencing free speech and activism and our ability to speak out. But then to go after the lawyers, because if you can't only afford the one or two guys, they got the Army of 600, you can only afford one or two. What they did in that case was they tried to get that one or two to say, I don't want to have anything to do with this because they're going to come after me.
yeah.
They're going to put me in jail. They're going to bankrupt me. Like, it's not just you they're going to go after. They're going to come after me too. And that was,
Well, it should
I
come as no
mean,
surprise that Gibson Dunn has done the same thing in this case, and they are attacking some of the lawyers on Greenpeace's side already.
geez, geez. So how can we stop these? So it's great that you're bringing awareness to this, that we're learning about these lawsuits. It's great that you're going to be watching over the case. I'll certainly be following this case. But how can we stop these kinds of SLAPP lawsuits from happening in the future? If only 10 states have
Yeah.
anti-SLAPP laws, like what can we do?
Well, one is absolutely call your congressman when the new federal anti-SLAPP legislation resurfaces in current Congress. I don't know exactly when that's going to be, but it's going to happen. Two is we have to make the equation balance back in the favor of free speech, which means it's not cost effective because everyone's going to focus on the fact that Energy Transfer Partners is bringing these insane claims. And then people look at, oh, what actually happened? Turns out that the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe has actually reviewed the safety record of ETP, and it's got the worst spill record of hazardous liquid pipeline operators in the United States. They don't want people to know that. Why will they learn about that? Because they're reading about a SLAPP suit that they brought against activists trying to silence them. It's what happened in Stephen Donziger's case too. Once people realized he was being targeted in an unbelievably unfair manner, they started looking more deeply into the Chevron case in general and understood, oh, this is an unbelievable travesty of justice. I didn't even know about this. And that backfired on Chevron, and it backfired on the lawyers involved in the case. So it's important that we respond to threats with free speech by spreading more information and sharing those stories. That's why
Yeah.
it's so important that you're having me on and we're talking about this case. It needs to grow in a viral way because that will make Energy Transfer go, well, it wasn't really worth it. And all we did was create more support for Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. Another thing that we haven't talked about that's important to mention before we have to go is that there's a parallel case going on where Standing Rock is suing the Army Corps of Engineers because they ultimately, at first they had stopped the pipeline. And then after the CEO of ETP, who, by the way, donated heavily to Trump's campaign and to his inauguration, he gave, as soon as Trump got into office the first time, he approved the pipeline going forward, even though the Army Corps of Engineers had blocked it. And now they've permitted it. As you know, it's been built, right? So Standing Rock
Right.
is suing the Army Corps of Engineers. Well, 14 US states who are not even affected by the pipeline. The pipeline doesn't go through those states. They have joined that lawsuit. They've introduced a motion to intervene in that lawsuit on behalf of the Army Corps of Engineers, saying that by stopping Dakota Access Pipeline, it could adversely affect their economy. So now taxpayer money is being used to go after the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe and prevent them from achieving justice and stopping the Dakota Access Pipeline. So there's a real kind of unholy union between corporations and US government, in this case, these states, and that's continuing to grow. If we don't
Yeah.
protect that guideline and draw attention to that, we're going to see more and more of this, where you're actually, your own taxpayer money is being used to go after your own free speech rights.
And I think it's
It's
important
an
for people to know that the courts, what's really interesting, and it's not enough attention is paid to this. But first of all, protests, the both sides are going after, and I mean left and right are going after protests. We're seeing a crackdown on protests, laws that are being passed against protesters, and this is so underreported on, even by myself. But like laws that are being passed against a variety of different protests. One of them that
Yeah.
we see a lot of attack on right now is like the pro-Palestinian protests. They're definitely under big attack, and laws are being passed. And then, and also with green activism, I think those two groups right now are kind of the most targeted that I can think of when it comes to protesting. But it affects everybody. It affects all the protests because, of course, those laws are not just specific to, well, only if you're protesting this particular thing. No, it's like all the protests are suddenly under these laws. So that has to be paid attention to more. Another thing is to understand that like you mentioned, the Trump administration did some things that allowed this pipeline. Then the pipeline was stopped for a second in 2020, but then it went forward again. And Biden was president. That was under the Biden administration, and the pipeline was
Yeah.
allowed to be completed and made operational. So it's both, left and right are pro corporate, pro big business, and pay more attention to the business and the corporation than they do the people. And another thing people don't realize is the courts are like that also. When you look at the Supreme Court, the only they aren't unanimous on quite a few cases, but they're always the corporate cases, the big business,
Yeah.
big corporation cases. Left or right on the Supreme Court, it doesn't matter. They put their differences aside. They are pro corporate. The Supreme Court is pro corporate. So that's I think we have to recognize that the courts and the government has always been to the benefit of the big businesses and the corporations, and that we, the people, have to fight for our rights. We are the little people, and we have to keep fighting, and we have to fight both sides. And it needs to be way more attention needs to be put on it.
Well, another thing that
Um,
people could do if they're so interested right now is get on social media and demand to get a live stream of this case to watch what's going on. Like, the judge has thus far refused that, but he hasn't heard from people. It hasn't been, just from the organizations and some of the news that have been covering it. There's been articles that have come out in The Guardian, a really good one just 2 days ago, about the trial monitoring group. But there hasn't been yet enough attention paid to put pressure on them to say, okay, there's enough people who want to see this. We've
yeah,
seen now Americans want to know what's going on. And so their duty is to respond to that. They've even said they're not even going to have a spillover room. A lot of times in these courtrooms, when there's too many people there, they set up a TV monitor, they put it in another room, and they set up chairs, and they say, if you can't make it into the courtroom, you can go into this overspill room and still watch what's happening. They're even refusing to do that in this case.
mhm,
And I know there's going to be more than 60 people trying to get into that courtroom next week. So the judge should hear that, and in respect for fairness and for transparency, which is what our court system and justice system is supposed to be, he should acknowledge and permit people to see what's going on. I'm going to be in there. Everyone's going to be taking notes. We're going to be reporting back on what happens. That's why we have this trial monitoring committee there, because we were afraid if we didn't do that, no one would know what was going on
mhm.
a day-by-day basis. And this is a tremendous amount of work for 5 weeks of a trial to do that. It should be available for everyone to watch.
Yeah. So how can people continue kind of keeping updated on this case? Do you guys have a website together, or is it just how
Yeah.
can we get info?
Well, we have a website. It's called trialmonitors.org.
Okay.
So that's a simple one to remember. And then, Greenpeace is going to be doing its own report backs. I think every Thursday they're having webinars for anyone who's interested to hear their point of view of it. So it's also important to mention the trial monitoring group is separate from Greenpeace. Yes, many of us are from the environmental and human rights movement, but this is not orchestrated or controlled in any way by them. We're there to ensure transparency and fairness. But Greenpeace has its own, obviously, campaigning and messaging. And so if people want to go to their Greenpeace USA website. I'm sure they could sign up to participate in those webinars. And then we'll be putting out press releases. We'll be posting on social media. We have a Blue Sky account. Forgive me, I forget. We just set it up, so I forget the name. But I can send that to you if you want to share it or put it in the link to this session.
I think I have that in the link down below for you. So, well, I have your Blue Sky actually down below. But, oh, no, I have also Amazon Watch on there as well.
Yeah, there's another one that's just for the trial monitoring group.
We'll add that for sure.
But I'll share that.
Okay. Paul, thank you so much for being here and giving us insight into this case that, many of us hadn't heard about prior to this. And it's really, I think, a fundamentally extremely important case. We've just got to protect the right to protest in this country. We have to protect our free speech. We have to protect the First Amendment. And it doesn't matter which side you're on or which cause you agree with more than other causes or whatever. We all need to have that right, every last one of us. So, Paul, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which has a new show time. Catch the full Kim Iverson Show, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Head to KimIversonShow.com. See you there.